Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for a seminar that will be, I guess, I hope, as provocative as it will be fascinating. First and foremost, I want to thank Mara Marvao, International Specialist Consultant at Philips, and Nuno Crespo, Dean of the Deans of Escola das Artes at Católica University, for associating Serralves to this seminar, which is really the conversation that needs to happen at the moment. This is the conversation of the moment. I think, Nuno, the fact that you planned it the week after NFT and Bitcoin took a huge plunge, I think was very strategic, so we thank you for that as well. As most of you, I'm here to learn, and I only have questions, so I'm looking forward to the conversation. My questions run around the following lines. What do a Bored Ape, Mona Lisa, and Madonna have in common? Is a CryptoPunk the cryptocurrency version of Warren Buffett? Why did Beeple NFT sold for $69 million? Is Beeple a genius, a crook, or both? Why can't I wear my $134,000 Nike NFT sneakers? Are NFT a currency? Would Yves Klein have produced an NFT zone of immaterial sensibility? Can a museum support its operation by selling NFT versions of Guernica or Mona Lisa? Are NFT just the next luxury good? Are NFT the future of art or the future of the art market? Are NFT an unregulated digital visual pollution open to speculation? What did come first, the NFT or the egg? Is God an NFT? Am I an NFT? And I hope you can answer all these questions, because I don't want to have the humiliation to ask my 10-year-old to answer. Thank you very much. I want to welcome Mara and Nuno to the podium. Thank you.
Good afternoon. After this introduction, it's going to be difficult. But first of all, I would like to thank the Serralves Foundation Board of Administration and the Museum Director, Philippe Verne, for welcoming this initiative. I would also like to thank the School of Arts of the Catholic University and its director, Nuno Crespo, for creating the concept of this seminar. The Center for Research in Science and Technology of the Arts, CITAR, and the Center for Digital Creativity, CCD, and its directors, both research units at the Catholic University. It was with great pleasure that Philips joined and supported this initiative. The topic of our seminar, generative art, has, it seems, suddenly come into the spotlight. I think one of the reasons for this is because it revolutionized the art market. The results that NFTs have obtained and the place they have been occupying in the market in recent years make this a very current and relevant topic to talk about. We are all interested in knowing more about them and in understanding this phenomenon that shook the art world, coming seemingly out of nowhere to currently represent 16% of the global art market. We are also seeing the works of artists, namely the pioneers of generative art, some 70 years later being recognized both by institutions and traditional collectors. We will now have the opportunity to discuss all matters related to generative art, and for that we can count on a panel of specialists and crucial artists to whom I would like to thank their presence and their generosity in sharing their knowledge and experience with us. It will certainly be a very interesting conversation from which I am sure we will all come out more informed and enlightened. Thank you. Sorry, and now I'm introducing Nuno Crespo.
So, hello, good afternoon, all of you. After the brilliant presentations by Maura and Philippe Vergne, it's quite a difficult task to say something, but I will try. So, at the art schools, the School of Arts at Universidade Católica Portuguesa, we are focused in artistic research and in particular in the study and experimentation of new media and technologies applied to artistic creation and reflection. So we are very much pleased to propose this program in partnership with Serralves and Philips to discuss the place of generative art and NFTs and in contemporary art practices and its markets. Traditionally, the artworks are considered exclusive and of difficult access. But the recent trend towards NFTs has opened up not only the art markets, admitting new agents outside the traditional art scene, but also it means an expansion of the artistic field, which has opened a vast lack of possibilities for artists to create, research, and develop their own practices. This market transformation has already been recognized by the main agents, collectors, and institutions in the world, such as Philips, Sotheby's, or Christie's auctioneers, who have placed NFTs and generative art in their portfolio of the works they present to their clients. In the last year alone, the volume of transactions in markets and art collections associated with NFT smart contracts has surpassed $40 billion in cryptocurrencies. We would like to take this interest, we at the school, to take this interest in art markets in this new art format, let's say we will discover with Sofia Garcia, what does this new means? To think about the possibilities it might open to artists to diversify their means to access and engage not only with the art markets, but for us as an art school, and most importantly, to think how this new paradigm means an opportunity to find new forms, shapes, and processes of artistic creation. Generative arts and NFTs have captured the attention of investors, and most have been trading for hundreds and thousands of dollars, as we have been mentioning. But what is exactly generative art, as Philippe was asking? How does it articulate with NFTs? And what does this mean to the art market? Will there be a mass adoption of NFTs by market, museums, curator, or they will suffer a long-term rejection? These afternoon seminars, which we hope will be the first of many, we will try to answer these questions, or at least to begin to try to find their answers. For us at the school, it is a very important occasion, especially because we develop in our programs in new media art, both in bachelor, master's, and the PhD, these kind of questions. But also because we have been working and developing it, as Maura has mentioned, in our research centers, CITAR and CCD, this kind of work. Finally, I would like to thank the two institutions that have made this evening possible. First of all, I would like to thank the Serralves Museum of Contemporary Art in the person of its director, Philippe Vergne. Thank you very much, Philippe, for hosting this session, and also to the president of the board, Dr. Ana Pinho. And I would like to thank also Philips in the person of Maura Mervaux, international specialist and representative for Portugal and Spain, that has embraced this seminar and this idea immediately with their very known enthusiasm and energy. This is not the first time we have partnered in creating a moment of discussion. We have made something together here at this auditorium 2 years ago with Francesco Bonami, but tonight we want to create a moment of discussion around the articulation of art markets and contemporary art practices. And I'm certain that we will have that opportunity here this afternoon with us. I would like to say a special thanks to Benjamin Candler and Sofia Garcia for having helped us design this program. They immediately embarked in this adventure and brought all these amazing artists and people to Porto this afternoon. So, without further ado, I would like to present our first speaker today, that is Benjamin Candler, and he will talk about his talk as the title, The Art Market. Benjamin Candler is a private sales assistant and NFT coordinator at Philips. He holds a degree in art history from Goldsmiths, University of London. Mr. Candler has worked in several art institutions, such as the Barbican Center, Monica Art Fair, Corvid Mora Gallery, among many others. He has worked with artists, students, and in the Articulation Prize to increase the participation in art history as a discipline and the arts in general as a field. After Benjamin Candler's presentation, we'll make a short break of 10 minutes to have a wine, and then the following speaker will be Sofia Garcia, which will deliver a lecture on the history of generative art. Over the last 6 years, Ms. Garcia has become a reference in the generative art space as a curator, counselor, and a community builder. Ms. Garcia was honored with Apollo Magazine's 40 Under 40 in Art Plus Tech Business as founder of the magnificent project Art X Code, a generative art house. She currently serves on the Art Blocks Board of Trustees and is also an advisor to the company. She previously worked at GP Onyx Morgan as a blockchain technical design strategist and as the director of Code Art Education, a non-profit focused on teaching girls to make art with code. Thank you all for your presence here this afternoon, and I hope sincerely that we can not only widen up our knowledge about these new art formats, but also to be able to find today here the perfect spot to open an intense discussion about the important transformations we are witnessing in the art of our times. Thank you very much. Benjamin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nuno, for that lovely introduction. So I'm Benjamin Candler. I work in private sales, and I'm also the digital art lead for Philips Auction House, based in London. And so today I'm kind of going to run through what Philips has been doing in terms of digital art, even slightly before my time at the auction house, and then moving forward, kind of what we're looking for and what we're kind of focusing on in terms of strategy and a bit of market insight. And then towards the end, if anyone has any questions about the market or the art kind of historical side or just any crazy random questions, feel free to shoot them over. And we'll also kind of run through our upcoming Ex Machina sale, which will show about 50 historic works, both NFT and generative, from the 1950s through to present day. So Philips, slightly before my time, I have a colleague called Rebecca Bowling who kind of ushered digital art and NFTs into the auction house. And she embarked on this adventure with an amazing artist, Canadian artist called Mad Dog Jones, producing this work with Replicator. And Replicator itself is kind of a short loop of a video, clearly of a photocopy machine, but it also is kind of a real interrogation of smart contract art and the possibilities of it. And so we kind of have a photocopy machine, and it produces different outcomes, and the work itself replicates over and over again. And within that work, there's the possibility for it to keep replicating forever. So if a collector holds the work, they'll be given additional works, and this will kind of continue on. There is an element of chaos in this work, which I love, and that's like with most photocopiers, if you work in an office, they jam, which is very frustrating and can often ruin the work. And so within the piece, as kind of the work produces itself at random, a burn mechanic within the smart contract can destroy the art. So if the work produces 2 outcomes, and then 4 outcomes, and 6 outcomes, the next time, one might be reduced, you might get a ton more, some more. And so there is a real act of randomness within the work, which was quite beautiful. And at the time of the sale, back in April, the work sold for $4.1 million, which kind of just shows kind of how incredible it was, and also the market at that time. And it also set the record it made Mad Dog Jones at the time the most expensive living Canadian artist, and that's across contemporary art and the whole art market, which was really something. And then, kind of shortly after our foray into Replicator, we also looked at Sarah Miohas's Bitcoin series. And so Sarah Miohas kind of plays with the idea of tokenomics, currency, kind of the economy and capitalism at scale, but also the possibilities of kind of blockchain technology when it's integrated with art. And so she started this project way back in 2015, which actually predates the Ethereum blockchain, which kind of just shows how much of an OG she is. And then what she did later, in about 6 years after, so in 2021, when we had the sale, she migrated the Bitcoin project to the Ethereum blockchain, and she backed each Bitcoin itself with a rose petal. And so kind of playing with the idea of almost currency being pegged to $1 or having a physical backing of some kind, which is kind of now super popular, but at the time was revolutionary. And what she did is she had a kind of a set supply to kind of create scarcity. So she had 3,291 Bitcoins, and we were very fortunate to receive 480 of those, which we sold in bundles. And again, we kind of were, at the time, really kind of differentiating ourselves from the other auction houses, I guess, with a slightly more conceptual approach, kind of looking more to smart contract art and generative art. And that kind of leads us up to where we are now, which is kind of ex machina, which is kind of the evolution of our interest in generative art at the auction house, and likely what we're going to be focusing on pretty much moving forward. And so the ex machina sale came together about 6 or 7 months ago with a Swiss curator and advisor called Georg Bach, who's a specialist in generative photography, and really just a master and just a fountain of knowledge when it comes to works, especially from the 50s and 60s and 70s. And we decided we wanted to put on a historic auction, but also an exhibition which would be open to the public, and really educate both collectors and the public alike about the kind of the history of generative art, how it started, where it's going to, and kind of possibilities for the future as well. And so we've collected about 50 works, and they start in the 1950s with pioneers like Herbert W. Franke. We have works by Vera Molnar, Vladimir Bonacek, and we also have more contemporary works by artists like Snowthrow. And so here we have the Chromie Squiggle, which some of you might be familiar with. It's kind of one of the most popular examples of generative art, and kind of one of the most playful, and kind of the poster child for generative art. And the Chromie Squiggle was the first project on Art Blocks, which Snowthrow, also known as Eric Calderon, also founded. And so the process for creating a Chromie Squiggle is Eric himself produced a set number of variables, which he controlled, and I'll show you some of those, because I think it's also great with kind of generative art. It's cool to see one, but actually when you see a set of them, you really understand kind of the breadth of the algorithm and all the different variations and kind of randomness that can occur. And so with Chromie Squiggles, I also think it's a great thing to explore, because they're very simple, they're very playful, but also they can get quite complex, and people often have favorites. Mine are the kind of ribbed, the hyper-ribbed and the slinkies, and depending on kind of their characteristics, they also have varying degrees of rarity. And so Eric plugged in several different variations which could possibly occur when the project was first released. So, there's the possibility of slinkies, hyperbolds, and these may only occur a few times or several times, like the standard works, which you can see 60% or 61% of them kind of have. And then the way this work is kind of produced, it doesn't exist until someone actually purchases it. So that algorithm kind of, in a way, plays with the hash transaction key, and that in turn produces the different outcomes. So until the work is bought, no one knows what they're going to get. It's kind of a very democratic and interesting way to create art, both with collectors and also with the public. And you don't know what you're going to get, which is brilliant. And then people can trade them, obviously. I think a lot of people tend to keep them, especially within generative art collecting. Everyone I know that's quite serious about it has one, or 10, or 100. Like, they are just the thing you have to get. And so we have a chromie squiggle on our show, which I thought would be also a great way to start the exhibition and really introduce people into the possibilities of it. So then we also have in this exhibition, we have a work by Distributed Gallery, who are a collective of engineers, hackers, artists, coders, and they're all anonymous. And what they did in 2018 was create something called the Chaos Machine, which I absolutely love, and it is pure chaos. So the Chaos Machine, the way it works, is essentially you put fiat currency, if you can believe it, right into this little slot here. It drops down into the chamber, and then it has these kind of metal grids at the bottom, almost like a toaster. It immediately sets fire to the work, and in doing so, basically spits out a song out of the speaker system, and then prints out a QR code. And that QR code, if you scan it, it registers on the blockchain and allows you to register a song on the blockchain. And the next time someone uses it, that song will be played and that song will be there forever. So it's a real kind of interesting take on blockchain art and the possibilities of it. There's also 2 of these works, and if any song plays on one machine, it plays on the second machine at the same time. I've actually got a short video, if you guys could play it, which kind of illustrates how the work. Okay, so yeah, the Chaos Machine is clearly quite chaotic, but it's also, thinking about it recently, I guess, with the current market and the state of cryptocurrency, there's something quite beautiful about the fact, I guess, that this kind of group of anarchists decided, what are we talking, like 4 or 5 years ago now, that smart contracts, there's now a real culture, which I've noticed, and a shift, I guess, in collecting, especially generative art, that people have completely shifted away from kind of traditional currency, fiat currency, and collecting in the traditional way, and people now, solely live with kind of smart contract art, cryptocurrency, and it's becoming more and more popular to live your life with that. And this work is, I guess, an illustration of that transition. So we also have slightly, equally chaotic, but slightly more simplistic works aesthetically. And so it's a pioneer called Vera Molnar. She's Hungarian. She's super cool, and she is 98, and she actually was representing Hungary in the Venice Biennale this year. So she's having a bit of a breakout moment, which is long overdue. And we're super fortunate to have a work called Disorderous. So Vera has been making works going back sort of 50, 60 years now, and she was essentially making works at the same time as kind of the minimalists and the conceptualists. Lewitt, I guess, is a good comparator, and really didn't get kind of the attention she deserved or the publicity she deserved, and is now having a breakout moment. But her process for kind of creating generative works, back in the late 60s, she was part of the research lab at the Sorbonne University, and she got her hands on a computer and would just sit there endlessly kind of inputting ones and zeros over and over and over and over again, trying to get different kind of aesthetic outputs. This work is super unique in that it's 5 meters long, and it comes with 9 different plotter drawings kind of spread out, and a work of this size has never ever come to market before. There's a few institutions that have kind of similar works, but none have ever been sold off, or of anyone's ever had the opportunity to purchase them. And the process for this work is super simple. So you have 5 squares by 5 squares, creating 25 squares within. And with each work, Vera constantly, and with all her work she has done for the last 60 years, she constantly plays with this idea of kind of chaos and order and the interaction between that aesthetically, and lives her life very systematically every day, creating order, creating chaos, kind of the play and the interaction between those two concepts. And with this work, you can kind of see in the first output she makes, it's fairly simple, it's quite kind of symmetrical. This one even more so, slight overlap, and you have density in corners. This one's super uniform and kind of very aesthetically appealing, and then classic Vera, you have this kind of chaotic moment, and line kind of just dances across the page. And so, yeah, this work is absolutely fantastic, and also it shows a bit like the Chromie squiggles. At the time, none of these artists had the ability to kind of make art non-fungible or produce them as a token or share them publicly, or have the public be able to view them in the same way you can now with the blockchain and distributed technology. And so, if you think about someone 60 years ago, literally, I would go crazy sitting there just inputting code every single day and kind of getting these crazy outputs. And now it's not easier, but it's you can also be a lot more flexible with stuff and add color in. Back then, you literally had to put in code. If you had access at the time into a plotter, you could then kind of push it out through that and then have a pen meticulously execute the work. And if you messed up, that was it. You had to restart all over again, and weeks of work were gone. And then kind of the final work I'll talk about from the exhibition is Vladimir Bonachek's work, which is, well, a good point before this is when I was putting the show together, I wanted a complete breadth of mediums. So sculpture, installation, we have photography, obviously we have NFTs and different types of NFTs. But I love Bonachek's work. So it's almost like a strobe light, kind of very rave type energy, and it spits out these different kind of light patterns over and over and over again. And this work, which was made in the late 60s again, so similar time to Vera Molnar, Bonachek was really playing with this idea of aesthetics, living with computers and the interaction between technology and art, and the possibility of output, and it's particularly within kind of everyday mediums. So this is made of these small glow lamps. You have this kind of cross hatch. It's actually made of these small kind of square tubes that are all kind of meticulously put together. And on the back of the work, you have a little kind of switch, almost like you get on like an amplifier, which you can turn up and on off, and it literally has like a domestic on and off switch and this crazy transistor to keep everything together. And what you can do is increase the frequency that outputs are created, varying from, I believe, 0.7 to 5 seconds. And every time you will get a different pattern. So the computer just keeps on giving you these different signs in and out. They're absolutely beautiful, kind of put you in a trance almost. And with these works, I've actually got it here, I believe it's the same pattern. If you keep it on the 2-second mode, the same pattern won't be created again. Assuming, we all have energy in that amount of time, I'd hope. But you won't see the same pattern produced again for 270 years, which is just incredible. So it's a work that, I guess, a bit like the Mad Dog Jones, just keeps on creating itself until eventually it breaks or destroys itself. And then I guess the other thing to talk about is obviously kind of auction houses are moving into the NFT space and kind of the market outlook for the next few years. And one of the things we've kind of discussed at Philips and is kind of inherent to our values is always being on the cutting edge of kind of contemporary art. We always have been, hopefully we always will be. And we often get offered Bored Apes and kind of all these PFP projects, which are cool and they have a moment. But ultimately, to me, generative art is the natural art historical progression from the work from the 50s and 60s and 70s. And so from an auction house perspective, we recognize that we have influence in bringing stuff to market, and it's really important that we shine a spotlight on kind of these earlier artists and also work with artists directly, which we rarely get to do as an auction house. Stuff's only secondary. So being able to work with us directly to either make works specially for auctions, or even just source really unique pieces that are out there, and have the opportunity to show kind of leading digital art is something that we're focused on. And a point about this exhibition is it's also particularly unique because it will be on view in Paris for 2 weeks, opening on the 30th of May. And we kind of encourage the public to go in. There'll be kind of educational talks, and it'll also be on view for the whole month of July on our London premises. Again, with some of the artists talking themselves, kind of academics coming in, and then also curators giving talks and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'll open up the floor to any questions anyone might have about the art market or the NFT market or the market as a whole. Or if nobody's got any questions, we can move on to the break. Yeah.
Thank you, Benjamin, for your very, very inspiring presentation. Well, my question is more provocative than a real question. So, what in terms of what we imagine, and I think that after the break with Sofia, Marcel, William, Iskra, and Monica, we will go deeper on this. But what we have showed us are material art objects. So. And when we imagine digital art, we imagine something that is immaterial, that is not tangible, etc. So, and I think that on our heads, we would like, if you can, of course, elaborate a little bit more. How does an auction house such as Philips works with such an intangible, invisible things such as an NFT or a code that is inside a computer, etc. So,
yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things there. So even with NFTs, which are, I guess, intangible, and you imagine them as kind of not being a physical thing, someone behind that has had to code that through a physical machine. And so generative art at its core is about that interaction between machine and human, and the kind of acts of randomness and automation that can happen, sometimes out of choice, sometimes not so much out of choice. And so I think as an auction house, we, for hundreds of years, we focused on mainly physical works, and that's kind of our bread and butter. But, NFTs are also unique for us in that they're fairly, in some ways, much easier to deal with. You don't have to ship stuff and insure stuff and all kind of the complex logistics that come with that. But also you can do some really funky things with them. So if you want to show a work, simultaneously all over the world, if you want to have one here, if you want to have one in the auction house, in a collector's house, you can seamlessly beam that over. And so I guess us evolving and kind of engaging with the play between physical and NFT, there are loads of possibilities. I mean, but the thing I try and stress is that this work hasn't just come out of nowhere. It hasn't just existed intangibly and kind of turned up on the blockchain. Someone spent, as probably here in the artist panel, weeks, months, and years tapping away behind a computer physically in a very manual way, kind of practicing and putting inputs and. And I think with all digital art, it's very hard to see the practice behind it because it does so seamlessly exist online in the digital. But there's always a physical component to that, and it's important to showcase that physical interaction.
As usual, the first question is always the artist. I'm very curious that there is also, besides this first question, your main, well, I'm not asking for the name of the client, but your main clients are private clients that usually work in the trade. Well, how are museums such as contemporary art museums such as Serralves Museum, the Tate, MoMA, etc., which has been our guidance into the new trends in contemporary art dealing with these new art forms? How are they showing? Are they buying, or is it just a thing? Because for us that are outside this new market, it seems as if generative art and NFTs is a question of financial speculation. So how are art institutions working or reacting to these proposals that you are making?
Yeah, well, there's a few things there. So, I mean, the question I always pose if I meet people kind of in more public institutions is, wouldn't it make your life a lot easier if you didn't have to conserve stuff and ship stuff and put stuff in storage and back again? And most of them, I'm sure, would be very happy with that. So, I mean, there's been some resistance from kind of institutions, and that's understandable because we are in a movement, and often works aren't shown by public institutions until after the moment's happened. So there's that. But there's also new types of institutions popping up, especially in the metaverse. We have kind of online viewing rooms and galleries. And the type of client actually is really transitioning as well. So there's a lot of interest from kind of traditional collectors, institutional collectors, galleries, private collectors. But you also have collectors of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, who themselves are forming kind of an acquisition network. So instead of having a board of trustees who pick to acquire stuff, you have these kind of new DAOs which choose to make acquisitions, and they themselves are building like Punk 659 is quite popular. They're building enormous virtual museums and acquiring digital works for that. And then I guess it's less digital in a way, but of the physical works. So, for instance, the V&A has one of the largest collections of generative art in the world. Collect dozens and dozens of Herbert Frankers and Bonicics, and actually the Tate and MoMA both also have quite interesting kind of collections of digital art, mainly from the 50s and 60s up until kind of the 90s. But I think in the future we will see a lot more museums engaging with digital art purely itself as a medium. But there's also a lot of hurdles, as you said. There's speculation. What do you pick? How do you know something's going to stick forever? And I think for more contemporary museums who are up for doing something a little bit funky or a little bit newer or a bit experimental, the best thing is to work with artists directly or commission them, because you take away that idea of the market and the financialization kind of attached to it, and you can let the artist completely experiment. So I think that's the way forward for institutions is commissioning works and then taking that into their permanent collections.
I have a pure market question. Because if we follow the market evolution of NFTs over the last couple of years, I think it really came to the general awareness rather recently, even though there is a long history of this experimentation. But how do you, if you sell a Mark Grogan painting or Louis XVI chair, you do market analysis, you do fair estimate, market estimate based on a series of constellation of information. How do you assess the value of an NFT when it reaches the auction block? And I think everybody was extremely surprised when actually Beeple, I think a year ago or a little less now, sold for a stratospheric amount of money. We have a lot of conversation saying, well, okay, it's insider trading. It's the buyer is part of the same industry. It's crypto. They're the crypto billionaires just raising the value of their own investment. But basically, I mean, a lot of what we see, values are so high that even to your question of how do institutions get involved, if we follow what you describe, maybe it's very hard for us. But how, like when an NFT comes to the market, what are the measures that you follow to give it a value?
Yeah, so there are a few different ways we do it. My personal favorite is set something at $100 and see what happens, because it's worth what somebody's willing to pay for it, and that's the fairest and most democratic way. Whilst that's great, like we saw with the Beeple, there are crazy market moments when markets are super high, they're volatile, and two people go crazy and bid super high, which is great for an auction house, but maybe not great for a market. And then you might see that crash down again. So that's one thing. And then when it comes to kind of placing estimates on work, I think there's more parallels with the traditional art market than people care to appreciate. And so one of the brilliant things about digital art, especially NFTs, it's very open source. So you can look at prices in real time. It's incredibly transparent. You can go on OpenSea, look at the provenance, which is, again, a big problem for auction houses. It's there. It says it says to the minute what time it was created on, who had it first, who's had it since, who's transferred it, essentially from which wallet to which wallet. And you can also see transactions going through, right? So with a Warhol or something, you might only get market updates every few months after an auction's happened, or through a dealer, or if something's coming primary. Whereas with NFTs, you can just go on OpenSea and see what the fair market price is for that really particular subset of a series. If there's a particular color out of 10,000 works, why is that color valued? People are also really transparent on Twitter, so you can also ascertain why people value things, and that kind of comes into play. And then I guess the other way to kind of price stuff is, there's cultural and historical significance, the same you have with traditional works. And so if a work is of an institutional museum grade, naturally it's going to command a higher estimate because it's more important, as the same you would with the traditional artwork. Especially with some of these early NFTs, especially like Sermio Haas works, the Chaos Machine, the Frankas, the Molnars, these are historical works, so they command a high estimate. Whereas with the Chromie Squiggle, which has been consigned also by the artist directly, he was like, let's set the price as low as possible and see what happens, and that's kind of my favorite approach. But then there are moments of chaos, like it's an auction, and that's great, and stuff lands on what it lands on. The best you can do is price stuff kind of conservatively, and that's the fairest way to do it. But moments of madness happen, as it happens in the traditional art market as well.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I'm just curious about these physical artworks you showed us. Is there a connection to tokens, to NFTs, to non-fungible tokens? For example, are you minting certificates of ownership? That way, for example, a physical piece can be as certifiably as possible transparent in dealings on the market, in conditioning, etc. That's one question, if there's a connection or if there's still a big separation between those. And a different type of question is about the token itself, because we're considering digital art as the process, art that's basically digitally created, but the token is a digital output. And me personally, I don't see great value in the token as an art piece, but only as a vehicle, a symbolic representation of something. For example, the certificate of ownership, a smart contract, something that does indeed produce a different intricacy, because otherwise we're going to go in those contradictions that Frankfurt School wrote about 6 years ago. So that's a two-part question, if you could just enlighten.
So the first part is, yes, we are definitely exploring ideas of kind of using smart contracts in the blockchain to track provenance. We've actually got a sale coming up next month with a car brand, with Bugatti. It's also in partnership with Asbury, where they're creating physical works, which is then tied to the token. And in fact, the smart contract itself allows you to gain control of the physical work. So there is that interaction there, and I think in the future it's definitely the way it's going. You know, tracking provenance can be an absolute nightmare, and so it makes complete sense to use it as a vehicle to track provenance. And then, I guess the only problem is, you know, you still have human error. So if you have a physical work and an NFT, if someone decides and you sell the NFT, the physical can get lost, right? That's like the beauty of the blockchain; it never gets lost. So, assuming there's no human error, which to some level there always will be, it's a flawless system. But I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of having the two living harmoniously, and making sure that people always transfer the physical, or people have the physical and they don't know how to transfer the NFT. And then could you elaborate again on the second question? Sorry.
For example, the first work you showed us, that was a digital output.
Yep.
The printing machine, the replicator, that's it. You were careful enough not to show us the video, because this artwork belongs to somebody. And when, in the olden days, when we had an artwork, it was our choice as the owners to either show it, sell it. The aesthetic or the fruition experience of someone was determined by whoever owned it or had control of it. Nowadays, that's not. I could have basically the aesthetic experience of this artwork that you didn't show, but you told us what it was right now, if you chose to. And there's not that. I don't see really the. That's what I was trying to come into. If the NFT is the symbol, the process, the contract, whatever, I see value in that, not specifically in the artwork. For example, Beeple's art is that in itself, and it's difficult for me to grasp.
So like
how the market, how institutions, our critics are seeing exactly the value in an NFT. That's the digital output. Is it clearer now?
Yeah, I think so. So I mean, I guess one of the things that NFTs have allowed is proof of ownership, right? And this is just constant debate of kind of the right-click save, and you know, you can go to the Louvre and take a photo of the Mona Lisa, right? And you can say you own the Mona Lisa, you can have it printed out, you can have a copy made of the work, right? But you still don't actually own the work. And so I guess for some people, I mean, yeah, and it's a double-edged sword, right? Because there's also, it's great in a way that you can see everyone's artworks, everything's transparent, you can see every output. And it's the internet, right? So you can also be anonymous. So just because your work's on view doesn't mean anyone knows you necessarily own it. There's also ways, of course, if you are so inclined, to kind of add layers of anonymity, become more anonymous in the way you hold works. But I think it's also one of the best things about NFTs and the movement as a whole is transparency. And there's a lot of critiques on the traditional art world for works being held up in storage units or being a storage of museums and never seeing the light of day. And actually there's something quite nice that these works are always on view and will always be on view, assuming those blockchains, keep running. And I mean, it's not for everyone, which I get, and it's also early days, and we've moved a lot, even 2 or 3 years ago to now. Works are getting more complex. We're actually seeing more kind of in real life versions of works being produced alongside kind of just digital aspects. I mean, if you it's kind of at the way of the collector. Some people like to collect things just to have things. Some people also want to collect a story, and so there's real value to them of being able to say, look, I own this. I'm willing to share it, but I own it myself, and I can do what I want with it. And you can, you have control over those works. Does that?
Isn't it purely a market value, what you just described, as in the value of my possession is only dictated by what I paid for and what someone down the line might be willing to pay for it?
I mean, that's why I say there's quite a lot of similarities with the art market, right? Yes, in a way, market value can be determined by literal supply and demand. But there's also works that people don't want to sell, and there's works that have never been sold, so it's very hard to determine the value on them. And then there's also works that are made, as I said, people commission works which have no market value necessarily at all, like you have for a public acquisition. It's a constant play with NFTs. There is market value and there's speculation, and that happens in every market, but people sometimes just collect and never sell. They just want to have those things forever, and they're willing to share them and preserve them, but,
I guess my qualm is with scarcity.
Yeah.
And there is scarcity. You mint as many NFTs as you want to. You can mint one, and there's only one. There's not real scarcity in the experience. And until we fully developed into a metaverse habiting species, I don't see how this... it doesn't really make sense for me how there's value. Either I understand the market value because it's derived purely by the price of it, but artistic, cultural, human value in it. Until we develop the tools to code everything in our lives, and then we experience what the code tells us to.
I mean, it's a good point, but I mean, in some ways, NFTs can be more scarce than traditional art, right? So if you have a living artist and they work on a series and they say, I'm only going to make 1,000 outputs, that's like, the algorithm, you cannot make more than 1,000 outputs. That is the be all and end all. Like, that scarcity is predetermined forever. Whereas with a physical artist, they could say, I'm only going to make 100 paintings. They live to 120, and they are throwing out editions of 100 every single day for the rest of their life. Surely that's more, there's a greater supply than you would with some NFT artists. And also, I think you're seeing now, I'm sure the artists will attest to, is with kind of the more blue chip generative NFTs, people spend months and months and months, and then might only release 1,000 works, once or twice a year. And actually, a lot of collectors collect multiple works from that series, and so the works become increasingly more scarce over time. And so, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon. I just want to ask you, what do you think is art today, maybe?
Just in general?
Yes, for you today. For you today.
The view today. God, the $1 million question. This has been debated for hundreds of years. I'm sure I'm not going to answer it in 10 minutes. But art today is for me, art is anything that allows you to see the world in a different way, and that takes a multitude of aesthetics, mediums, perceptions, and that varies also wildly by culture, language, taste, education, so many different things. For me personally, as I said, it's anything that lets me see the world in a different way. That could be the form of digital art and NFTs. That could be, 1960s Italian design. That could be installation. That could be painting. I think it's anything that people assign some kind of aesthetic value or kind of quality to, and allows them to perceive someone else's view of the world in a different way. And yeah, do you mean specifically also for generative art and NFTs, or just art in? Art in general, yeah. I mean, yeah. That would be my concise definition. And any kind of, aesthetic purpose that allows you to view the world in a different way that you couldn't before. How would you define art?
Okay, it's difficult, but I will see the aesthetic part in the art. So everything, well, that changed a lot over the years. Now it's another period, etc. But it's difficult for me to understand all this new art, to find the beauty in it. So that's why, and then you speak about the market, so I get lost with this. I'm sorry about my question, maybe it's not...
No, I mean, so I guess and it's a very, a question I get a lot about how do you find those aesthetics in digital art, because they can either seem quite redundant or simple or not very thought out. But I guess much like, an old master painting, the skill is the technique and the complexity of the code and the aesthetic decisions to make one output and not another. To choose one color and one variation over another, to choose one line or density or population of a work. And I think it's all about kind of seriality. And you saw it in, I briefly said in Vera Molnar's art, it's making those decisions between chaos and order and the interaction of that. And especially with smart contracts and coding, and especially art blocks projects, there's no margin for error. So these aesthetic kind of considerations have to be perfect, incredibly thought out, and then technically executed through code perfectly as well. So something like a chromey squiggle, which seems fairly simple and just like a little kind of colourful signature, the kind of the thought behind those aesthetics and then the skill of technique, I guess, is what gives it value and importance. And then, the market sometimes follows when stuff is particularly important. But I guess to that point as well, it's something like a Beeple, which I'm not the biggest fan of personally, doesn't have that much thought behind it, whereas the seemingly kind of simpler works often have a lot of thought and concept behind them. And over time, as the market matures, and as we're seeing at the moment, those people who hold or collect or are interested or engage with the works that are defined more by the skill of the code and the conceptual sensibility will shine through and be there in the long term.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you for the question. So we'll make a very short break, and after, I think it's the perfect point to make a break, because after we will return with Sofia Garcia, that will give us a broad historical development, and then we will have the discussions with the artists that will tell us where's the beauty in the code. Marcelo Rodrigues Soria, William Manepan, Iskra Velichkova. I did it? Well, cool. And Monica Rizolin, thank you so much for being here. So let's have some wine and return in 10 minutes. Thank you so much, Benjamin.
Here. My name is Sofia Garcia, and I'm going to cover a brief history of generative art. There we go. Okay, so a series of 10,000 algorithmically generated rainbow squiggles has become one of the most celebrated artworks among the NFT community. From the outside, understandably, the appreciation for the chromey squiggle may seem absurd, but this unassuming icon represents a coming-of-age story for an artistic practice that has largely been dismissed by the mainstream art audience since its inception in 1960, generative art. So, what is generative art? In the NFT ecosystem, the term generative art typically lends itself to describe any artwork that has been procedurally generated with an algorithm. Under this contemporary vernacular, the term is synonymous with digitally native work. However, according to scholars and theorists, generative art can be applied to any instance where an artist deliberately relinquishes control, either partially or fully, to a functional process or system. The term generative art simply refers to how the art is made, and the method is independent from any particular technology. a prime example of generative art under this broad definition is Islamic tiling, where artisans follow intricate rule-based systems to generate geometric designs. This classification does provide an interesting dilemma for the taxonomy of generative art produced with a computer, because regardless of the symbiotic relationship between the term computer and generative, a computer is not required to create or execute a generative artwork. So for the sake of this discussion, we will be talking about a specific subset of generative art referred to as algorithmic art. And in this case, it's any instance where the artist deliberately relinquishes control, either partially or fully, to an algorithm they have written to produce a work of art. That looks something like this. So this is an example of an algorithm written by Monica Rizzoli. We'll be speaking to her a little bit later. And this, just a portion of this, this algorithm, you see different functions that this algorithm produces each one of these artworks, and seemingly infinite amount. So how did we get here? How did we get to buying art on the browser and being okay with it? The story of algorithmic art begins at the convergence of innovations taking place across art, science, and mathematics in the 20th century. Leading up to the 1960s, art movements like Cubism, Futurism, Constructivism, and Dada presented a newfound dedication to geometry, abstraction, and chance, with a growing emphasis on technology, machine aesthetics, and mechanized production. There's also the rise of conceptualism with Solowit, the idea that the idea is the art, grounded in Duchamp and his ready-mades. In the 1950s, we see the rise of using analog computers to create artwork, and one of the first artists to do this was Ben Lepowski. He used a cathode ray oscillator to create abstract artwork using a long exposure photography. And towards the end here, he started adding filters so he could add some colors to that. But he was a mathematician by trade, and this was really a precursor to the fundamental shift in the artistic practice that would take shape less than a decade later with the onset of computational machines. No one can say with certainty who the first generative artist or algorithmic artist was, but starting in the early 1960s, there were two major centers of innovation, and the first being Bell Labs in New Jersey in the United States. It was here where artists like A. Michael Knoll, Lillian Schwartz, Ken Knowlton, and even Namjoon Paik would enter would foray into the computer art practice that spanned across 2D, 3D, audio, and animation. There are many artists that can be discussed today, but for the sake of time, I will focus on A. Michael Knoll. So A. Michael Knoll, at the time in Bell Laboratories, it was a research facility for the military, but they began to look into the machine's ability to create art and music, and engineers initially orchestrated the making of these works. In the summer of 1962, Michael Knoll produced a really famous memo referred to as Patterns by 7090, in which he explained the digital computer is presently being used to produce new musical sounds and techniques for composing. The advent of microfilm printing used in conjunction with a digital computer allows for excursions into the field of visual art. Thus, it would certainly be interesting to attempt the creation of novel designs by using the IBM 7090 computer and the Stromberg Carlson 420 microfilm printer. So for context, this is what the IBM 790 computer looked like. It was the size of a room, and the printer was, at the time, there were no graphical user interfaces. And so they had to use pen plotters to actually produce the visual artwork. This was really just the beginning for Knoll, and he used the programming language Fortran to produce his works. So this set off an idea for him after creating his work, which he referred to as Gaussian quadratic, that it had a resemblance to modernist abstraction. In this case, he saw it look like Majoli from Pablo Picasso. And so this gave him the idea to experiment with creating or appropriating a famous modern artwork. And he wanted to see and experiment this human or machine project in which he created a work that represented or essentially looked like modernist artwork and see what the people thought. It was his idea of the modern Turing test. So he decided he was going to recreate a composition with lines by Mondrian. And by identifying the Cartesian coordinates for each lines and points, he turned Mondrian's painting into a program. But a perfect copy of the original did not interest him. He wanted to see if the computer could apply some of its own creative agency. And so as a substitute for artistic intuition, Noll employed pseudo-random number generator, which varied the bar density, lengths, and widths of Mondrian's line. And he manipulated this program until he felt it was close enough. And so later that year, he decided that he would take a test. And he went around and asked people whether they thought either of those were made by a computer, but he took it a step further and asked, which one do you like better? And the results showed that 59% of the subjects preferred the computer-generated image, and only 28% were able to identify correctly the pictures produced by Mondrian. This has become a classic experiment in aesthetics, and won first prize in the August 1965 contest held by Computers and Automation magazine. Next, we have the Stuttgart University in the 1960s. This is a parallel hub for the earliest pioneers in computer art. One of the professors, philosopher Max Benz, led a profound impact on the students George Nies and Frieder Nacke, and artists like Manfred Mohr on aesthetics. The adoption of the term generative art actually came from Max Benz. And at the time, the term generative art and computer art were interchangeable. But this didn't come out of nowhere. Early pioneers adopted this term generative from Max Benz and his highly influential writings on generative aesthetics. This idea, he tried to create a rational aesthetic, free from subjective speculation and grounded upon scientific base. So he looked at it kind of like this: aesthetic measurement, or order, the ratio of order and complexity. And in Stuttgart, a generation of young scientists examined the different aspects of the mathematical value of information contained in aesthetic objects. Two of these artists were George Nies and Frieder Nacke. They were highly inspired by the idea of generative aesthetics, and you can see in their artwork the play of order and disorder. The first public generative art exhibition of computer art was at the University of Stuttgart, and it was called Generative Computer Graphic, and it showcased the work of George Nies. It was seen with a lot of disdain, and people were very angry, but they kept going. And later on in that year, in the United States, there was an exhibition at Howard Wise Gallery in New York City where the works of George Nies, Frieder Nacke, and A. Michael Noll were also showcased. 4 years later, George Nies wrote his PhD dissertation called Generative Computer Graphic under Benz, applying his aesthetic explicitly on computer art. And so this is really where that term generative came to play, which Max Benz actually took from Noam Chomsky's studies on generative grammar, which was largely influential on the creation of computer programming languages. So at this moment, we're seeing a lot of mathematicians, scientists, and engineers playing around with visual art. But at the same time, we see artists find the computer. So what some of these artists are: Veer Molnar, which Benji covered in his discussion, Manfred Mohr, and Harold Cohen. All of these artists studied art history in school. They were practicing painting or drawings. And Harold Cohen specifically really was exploring AI, artificial intelligence, and seeing if he could teach a robot to draw. I think he was very upset about the program's use of color, because he felt it was a bit insulting, because he really liked the way that he used colors. So then we see a few years later the landmark exhibition Cybernetic Serendipity, and this is the first instance where computer art is being taken seriously in a national scale, international scale. And artists like Charles Surrey, Frieder Nacke, A. Michael Noll, John Whitney, and others were there, including Namjoon Paik, James Seawright, John Cage, Kenneth Knowlton, and a few others. And so this exhibition had 3 major components: computer-generated art, cybernetic devices, robots, painting machines, and machines demonstrating the use of computers and the history of cybernetics. Following this, I think we see a lot of the usage of the computer in the visual art side anyways, this idea of replacing the tools that we were using. So you can think about Paint or Photoshop, where you're essentially just replacing what we would do with the pen and paper and making it digitally. But once we enter the 21st century, we can start to see a major change happening in the way that we were innovating with computer graphics. And the introduction of the internet was huge. So now we're starting to see Flash come to play and the rise of sharing of information online. So the MIT Media Lab is a huge, major influence on what we see generative art as today. So though she might not be a programmer, Muriel Cooper was highly influential in the start of the MIT Media Lab. She started the MIT's Visual Language Workshop, which then moved to the MIT Media Lab in 1985 as one of its founding sources. John Maeda became a professor there, and it was there where he kind of created this new program referred to as design by numbers. And it was this idea of creating a platform for artists and designers to explore programming. It was rather junky to use, it wasn't very easy. And so he called in some of his students to help him. And so in the 90s, several brilliant technologists began to work on this, 2 of those being Ben Fry and Casey Reese. They decided to rebuild this and took it, went all over the place, tried to get feedback, and decided to make a much more accessible program, to say the least. And they called this platform processing. So this is one of the early forms of processing. It was its own application, and even the words that it would use were a little bit more accessible for artists. So this is referred to as a sketchbook. They are not programs, they are sketches. You can play them, you can tinker around and see them run. And in the beginning, this was done with a Java-based programming. It was based off Java. In 2012, they created the Processing Foundation to expand their research and support the software development, and added Dan Schiffman and Lauren McCarthy as members of the foundational board. These 2 are massive. Dan Schiffman is one of the reasons most generative artists that you speak to, algorithmic artists that you speak to today, talk about Dan Schiffman. The videos that they watch on YouTube are the best. They're free. He's a professor at NYU, and he's just a quirky, funny guy. I love him. He's great to watch. And then to the right, we have P5, which is the JavaScript-based version of processing. And this was done and led by Lauren McCarthy. And so now you can run processing in the browser. JavaScript is the language of the computer, of the browsers. Everything that we do on the internet, JavaScript is happening behind the scenes. So this changed everything. We have open source, accessibility, YouTube, it's going everywhere. And now we have the advent of social media. And so now we have these artists that are learning online, sharing online, we're finding communities. This is actually a snapshot of the Artix Code Instagram back in, I believe, 2016, where we were just sharing artwork for the artists that we liked and wanted to share. And this is really what it looked like. We were just talking online, a bunch of hobbyists, having a good time, and starting Slack channels and sharing with each other. And it really wasn't until the advent of blockchain that things really started to change. So the impact of larval labs cannot be diminished. I know that they look silly, I know that they look crazy, but Matt and John from Larval Labs were really just trying to experiment. They heard about this blockchain thing and they were like, what is this? What can we do with it? And so they decided that they were gonna play around with it. We're like, let's create a program. We're gonna create all these different punks, all of them unique, and we'll try to put them on the blockchain. At that moment, NFTs, as we know them, did not exist. This project became one of the key inspirations in the development of the ERC 721 standard, which is what we refer to now as NFTs. And this project was launched in June of 2017, and at the time, they were just experimenting. The code is not stored on chain. These were images, and it was a massive moment. And so at the time, this is a screenshot of an exhibition, I guess showcase, not exhibition, that I had organized in 2019. And right across from me were the CryptoPunks. And so at this moment, every single one of these artworks were created with an algorithm, but there was really no way to connect that with collectors. So we had a book that had all the code in there. And so when someone appreciated or connected with the visual aesthetic of the work and they wanted to acquire it, we would have the code printed out for them, give that into all their package. So they'd get their certificate of authenticity, they'd get the code printed out, and they'd get the artwork there. It was actually here that a collector came up to me and said, I'd be interested in buying an NFT of one of these works. I said no. What are you talking about? Absolutely not. You go on OpenSea, one of the major marketplaces, and all you would see were these collectibles. You would see monsters. You would see, weird dinosaurs and stuff like that. And I thought these were fine artworks. But after some discussion, we decided, well, we might as well experiment with it. So this is an example of one of the first NFTs that Dimitri Cherniak, one of the artists that I work with, produced, and it was an aha moment for me. I remember going up to the collector afterwards with the print that he didn't want, by the way. He said he only wanted the digital asset, and I could not wrap my head around it. And when I approached him, I asked, why? And that was the first time I saw this idea of collectors really embracing digital galleries and a virtual space where they can walk around and showcase their work to the greater internet. I still brushed it off ever so slightly. I said, okay, he's a crypto nerd, that's fine. We'll keep it moving. But then something happened in 2019, and Autoglyphs by Larva Labs, there they are again, came out. And so this was monumental. This idea of a self-contained artwork on the blockchain. So when we talk about tokens and these tokens that represent or point to an image, this is completely different. The code, the artwork itself is stored in the token. It is self-containing. If you have the token, you have the artwork, you can decide to run it in any way that you want. And this, it opened up so much. So whereas punks were images, the autoglyphs are code and viewed and acquired as such. So when you think about Walter Benjamin and this idea of losing the aura of a work in mass production, this changes that, where as someone who appreciates generative art, now when I acquire that artwork, I get the essence of it. I get the soul, the performative act of it running in the browser, which really, again, it can't be understated how important that is. So then in 2021, we see, well, in 2020, art blocks came about. So this is where that squiggle comes back. And Snowfro, Eric Calderon, started that and as a big experiment. And as Marcel Duchamp said in 1957, the creative act is not performed by the artist alone. The spectator adds his contribution to the creative act. And art blocks is a key prime example of that. So in this instance, you can see a visual artwork that you like, and if you decide to collect it, you go ahead, you go in, you press mint or purchase, and what's stored on the back end of art blocks is the algorithm itself. And so as a collector, I'm evoking that algorithm and saying, I want to see what you can give me. And you get your own personal artwork from there, but that artwork cannot exist without the contribution of the collector. So in February of 2021, we see kind of one of the major hikes in art blocks and people paying attention. It exploded, and the community really just went absolutely wild. And it started to raise also some questions on curation and criticism, and what does it mean to have this type of artwork where the system can produce 1,000 artworks? There's an artist, Tyler Hobbs, came out with the term long-form generativism to explain what this is, and playing around with this idea that there can't be too much variation because then there's too much noise. No variation is boring. And somewhere in that sweet spot is where a lot of generative art seems to be navigating. And the great thing about generative art is that you can leverage the system to add that noise using randomness, whereas it would be too long to do that manually. And this was done on the Ethereum blockchain. And through this evolving ecosystem, there have obviously been concerns about some of the environmental impacts of that as in its early stages before it switches over now to the proof-of-stake network. And so we see the rise of FX hash on the Tezos blockchain. And it's here where you see a lot of artists, or especially early on, refer to this as the green NFT. And a lot of the artists that we work with that are here today, Iskra, Marcelo, and William also have done their work on Tezos. So I think here we kind of stop at where we start to get into the everyday life of the artist. And so I'd like to hear from the artists themselves, and we can ask a few questions and go from there. Thank you so much. Okay, so Marcelo, Iskra, William, and Monica, can you please join me up here? Testing. Okay, cool. All right, amazing. So thank you guys for being here. It's a pleasure to introduce Marcelo, Soledad Rodriguez, William Apan, Iskra Velichkova, and Monica Rizzoli. So each of these artists are at the top of their game in the digital art space. But as we saw in the presentation, a lot of the pioneers came from engineering and mathematics, but artists started to emerge as well. What were you guys doing before you started making generative artwork? Go ahead.
I was a painter, but I'm still one, so.
It's on.
Yeah. I started working as a data visualizer, which is actually very similar to generative art, but constrained by data. So that's how I enter in this world of code.
For my part, I was a creative developer, so it's a mix of being a creative with technical skills. I worked for 10 years in the advertising industry, so to put my skills, my creative skills at work. And at some point I was like, maybe I could do this for me, and that's how I started to work for myself and produce artworks.
Well, I am a frustrated architect, but for whatever reason, I ended up being an engineer. But somehow my career kind of was converging towards, let's say, more creative things, which I also did on the side. I worked for a little bit over 12 years at a bank, and I quit my job to try and start my own little thing, mixing strategy and art, actually with Iskra here. And at some point we said, screw that, let's just do art.
Amazing. So how has engaging with algorithms opened up your creative process?
It's kind of obvious for me to say because I was looking for a way to draw with interaction. Because when my first artwork in generative art was a landscape, and I was interested in how the landscape changed from different perspectives. So we cannot do that without hand-onness or interaction. And that's why I moved to algorithmics, to be able to introduce those concepts in the drawing or...
Yeah, in my case, as I mentioned, I started my journey with data. But then, like 10 years ago, there was a similar hype to this thing with data scientists and all this thing, which was complicated to explain to people. So that was amazing. But then at some point, I just realized that the algorithms themselves were what I was interested in. Like, I was working in a bank, so my work was so related to a huge amount of customers. So I began like reflecting a lot about how algorithms change the way we connect with the rest of the people and our context. So let's say some philosophical questions arose when I was there, and I just couldn't go further in a big corporation, so I just stopped. And now I explore with the most vague freedom that I can the algorithm. So they're the main thing I work with. I'm sorry.
For me, I think because I was a developer before, I always work with algorithm. But the idea of generative art started with how can I develop beautiful things with my algorithm skills and mathematical skills. And at the same time, as a hobby, I paint a lot. Well, I have a lot of artistic hobbies. And I was trying to merge both worlds. And that's how my practice became as generative art. It was mostly how can I merge both things and make it random. And then you start to explore how mathematical things and algorithms are beautiful and how you can merge them with traditional mediums. So that's how I came to it.
Yeah, I guess my story is more or less similar to William's. With this engineering background, somehow I had the hunch that code could bring me somewhere, and I kind of brought this approach of, I have to do things modular, I have to do things reusable, I have to do things that repeat themselves but change a little bit. But somehow, when I was a little kid, the little things that I was drawing, because I was never a very good drawer, were always like repeatable patterns, maybe because I couldn't do anything else. So I thought, I can do this, so I'm going to do this many times. But then somehow it was also present in music. I have always had like a very strong connection to music, and I studied music before I did generative art and other things. And through the works of Johann Sebastian Bach, which is like mathematics and patterns, and brought to the maximum possible heights for me. And then the minimalist composers, which actually were doing things in the 50s and 60s connected to generative artists back then. Somehow that was also like a repeatable pattern that it kind of got stuck in my head. So it kind of was natural to try and pursue those interests through at some point code and those skills and try to produce something else.
Are there any visual artists that specifically inspire you and in your practice? And that's a trick question because I know that you do. Not a trick, an easy question. Your last project, Entre Tiempos, if you wanted to talk about that. I had a photo of it up before. I don't know if you guys saw it, but please talk about it.
Well, okay. Actually, that project was based entirely in a desire to recreate the works of Sonia Delaunay and the Orphists, and basically in the end, as the project evolved, it started giving outputs that kind of resembled all the artists from more or less the same period. I have seen some František Kupka actually coming out of the algorithm, which I didn't expect, but it was just out of a need to recreate the emotions that I got from those works, which is kind of at the root of also my desire to do generative art, which is I enjoy certain artworks very much, and they speak to me and they move me very deeply. Also music, but I'm a pretty lousy musician, so I had to do with what I have, which is code, and just trying to recreate that. And to me, like it was like the perfect start point. I'm going to try to recreate this somehow and see if I can then, through generative art, like you have shown us in your beautiful introduction, thank you, how can we bring this through certain randomness and certain rules, how can we expand the total range of things that we can do within one specific aesthetic?
I think when we see the early pioneers out there, and they're very much focused on the most primitive forms, squares, circles, and breaking them into every point that they can. We're seeing with this new wave of generative artists the focus on nature and a bit more of a natural feel to their work, and I think two prime examples of this can be found in both William's work and Monica's work. William, you are amazing with your use of texture, your creation of texture with your work, and Monica, your flowers are absolutely stunning. I wanted to ask both of you if you can just kind of reflect on how you got there and what you were trying to explore.
I think I'm kind of an obsessive person. Because when I like to do something, I can spend nights, without sleeping. And mostly my practice of art, I wanted to do it with my generative code. And it's mostly my observation, my long observation of paper, textile, colors, and stuff like that, that at some point they just got through my algorithm, and I think I'm not even trying to replicate what I was seeing all those nights. It's more about it became part of me to produce texture, and because it's so deep in me, it just in my brain, I just try to replicate it, and I'm not sure it's on purpose. It's just the way I work, and yeah. Yeah.
So I love nature. It's obviously, and many years ago, I asked myself, is it possible to describe image through numbers? And I didn't know about programming at that time. And then I understood that nature is a kind of generative process. You can describe nature to numbers and equations, and you can extract beauty from this. So I start to look at the flowers and the animals, and not only about their aesthetical appeal, but trying to understand how they grow, what are the morphological aspects of those plants, how they change in different environments. That's why I have 4 seasons in the work, because all of them has flowers, but actually I'm not trying to mimetize the nature itself. It's a bit different because the most part of time you are using actual algorithms that were developed in universities to describe fluids, or botanic morphology, digital morphology, and things like that. But if you are just using them as they are, you are truly reproducing nature, but not always the visual aspect of the work is nice. You don't have the scales or the in-between result. So, I think that's it. And this idea that you are always walking in a field, and it's always changing depending on the seasons, and,
Yeah, definitely agree with Monica. It's more about how you interpret what you see, and how you can inject it in your own work. So it's not about mimicking or recreating something. It's more about questioning yourself, how this is doing this in this context. Maybe I could ask the same question in my context, and how it can apply to me.
And Iskra, your work also has this grain to it that I think is so phenomenal. And you also play around and produce work with plotters. How do you see, the relationship between the two? And do you have a different process, whether you're working in a digitally native space or with the plotter?
Yeah, definitely. Because most of my work is based of many thin lines, and whenever I try to put them on the plotter, it just break everything. So you have to design in a different way when you are meant to plot that work, because there is something very powerful with generative art, which is, of course, there is randomness, there is chance, there is a lot of things there, but also there is something for me, which is it's unachievable by a human. And that's something very powerful and kind of related to what William said before about finding things, not replicating, but just finding some new things and then applying to ourselves. So I think it's so powerful. And that's infinite, let's say. 1,000 iterations or 1 million, or we can do whatever we want. But then when it comes to the physical world, there is a huge constraint, very simple one. My paper would break if I am, depending on if it's summer or winter, if it's raining or not, the humidity will affect the paper, the ink, everything. So, yeah, it's like it's a very artisan work at the end. So that combination is a very interesting dialogue between us and the machine, because we are behind the machine when we plot, and maybe in the digital world it's on the reverse. So it's a very interesting process.
In contrast with the traditional art space, in which, when you go to a museum, one of the first things you do is take a look at the lines and the brushstroke of an artwork. In this case, generative art is not so much of a tactical process, but more of a mental one, of the art of the mind. What is your, what are your brushstrokes? Do you see it as the functions that you create, that you tend to reuse? Is it how do you think about that, your distinct process of creation?
Okay. I don't know.
Yeah.
The truth is, no. Probably, I guess it's probably different to each of us. So, but in my case, it's like I said earlier. My brush stroke is it is the art of the mind, like you said. So it is in whichever original intention I had to do this artwork. So, well, in the case of this one shown up there, it was like I mentioned before. I needed to create something like that because it was giving me a lot, so I tried to create something else. But when I have created other artworks, maybe it comes out of, for example, the inspiration of, I don't know, a ray of light that reflects somehow in some space, some different planes, and then I may spend some minutes looking at that. And that thought is maybe my brush. Because then I will try to recreate this thought, and I'll say, this gave me some kind of emotion. How can I bring this to life through code? In other cases, maybe it is actually a cyclical process, a feedback loop between this original idea and then the things that you're getting from the algorithm. And as you move the work along, the brushes become the thoughts that come out of the algorithm itself. Because you see what comes out of it, and you say, oh, this makes me think about whatever thing. And then that thought, which maybe has nothing to do with the artwork, comes back in the way of, oh, I have this idea, or I have this reflection on what the artwork is actually telling me, that I will couple with the artwork itself. In my case, I try to produce sometimes small articles writing about the thoughts that come with the artwork. And they are the same thing. I mean, what is the artwork? The visuals that the algorithms...
That was my next question.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, please, if you guys can comment on that.
I think my brush stroke is pretty much like the same than Marcelo. I think it's more about a process. I think the process is the brush stroke, if I think about it, and how we can iterate. I think iteration is a big part of the process in generative art. And I think the brush stroke, your function, your code just affine the more you work on it. And at the very beginning, it's a big splash of thought. And the more you work on it, the more it becomes narrow. And I think, yeah, that's that process that's defining the work, basically.
Yeah, for me, it's again the code, because actually when I plot, my brush is my brush, because I use brush. But in a very simple way, my brush in the computer are the pixels, maybe, and then if I print the work, are ink on paper. But then, more than the brush, for me, is like in painting, you have techniques, you have years of learning to draw properly things, and that's what we're doing with code. Because for me, like, maybe the huge difference between generative, not digital, but generative, is that we have to manage, we have to control the out of control, you know, because with the brush, you have the brush, and Pollock, you know, he painted like out of control, but he was constrained to ink or something, and now it's like you guide the system with a few rules, and then you have to balance an infinite range of outputs, but you have to be able to guide those randomness. So I don't know if that was the question, but yeah, I just got here because for me it's like, yeah, it's about the code, it's about the process, and yeah, I guess the same as for you guys.
You mean the brush as what is specific from me in the work? Yes. So I think it's the color contrast, and also I used to work with several events at the same time in the plane. Well, I don't know if it's clear for everybody this, but when an event is something that begins a process in the algorithm that will result in an image on the paper. So I have several things, at the same time. I also like to use the same color at the background and at the figures. So sometimes you can blur those limits. It's not so clear. And also, usually I work with what we can say codes of nature, or codes related to botanics or fluid dynamics or morphology in general.
And so we already referenced this, but I do have to ask, what do you believe is the art? Is it the code? Is it the output? Is it your thoughts? What is it, the system and all of the outputs as one? How do you feel about that? There's, it's kind of an open-ended question in a way. So just your thoughts on that.
It's all together.
Yeah.
They cannot exist one without another, so.
You mean, what's the art in this? Yeah. I'm not an art expert, but what I know about the art history, there are different movements, and the concept is something, the technique is something. I feel here the beauty is very important. It's something that you can be a great engineer, but then you have to put some soul in the process and some aesthetic feeling. But I found, in my case, what I really look for in my work, and because I'm trying to find where the art is in the process, it's the thing that I began in the first question, and it's about connections. And for me, machines can, let's say, I truly believe in this, make us more human. Because we have big questions from the beginning of the times about who we are, why we're here, so on. So now machines have the ability to process a lot of information, a lot of different contexts. They can relate this information. So I'm sure they can answer some of those questions. And if you are very attached to science or formal, let's say, knowledge, you can sometimes not advance so fast because what you are saying is not true because it's not a formal thing. But if you go through art, you can just get crazy there. And, as a kid, maybe at some point you can discover something. So that's the art for me of all this thing, getting to these questions through a beauty, or that's for me, I think. Thank you.
What is said? And I would add, generative art is like the art is the collaboration between us, the artist, the input, and what the machine can do. I often, in my work, push the limits of the machine. At some point, they literally cry, yeah, I can't do what you're asking for, So I have to deal with those limits and those constraints, especially with the blockchain, because it's really restrictive. And I think the beauty is both in the output and both in the process. I think to understand, to fully appreciate generative art, you have to understand both aspects. And yeah, I think that's it.
I'm happy that you asked that question. No, well, the thing is, maybe it is two different things. What is the art in generative art, which I don't know very much. What is the artwork for me? But there's really two different things. What is the art in what I do, and what is the artwork that I'm trying to do at one given moment? So regarding what is the art, to me the art is probably a little bit what I was mentioning earlier. What I do it because I want to provoke an emotion, just some kind of reaction in whoever is experimenting the artwork. So maybe it's, yeah, like I said, maybe it's an emotion, maybe it is rejection, maybe it's just a thought. Oh, this is curious, and maybe it evokes you something. So finding a relationship between the artwork and the experiencer of the artwork, to me that is kind of where the art lies. But the artwork itself, what is the artwork in the case of generative art? Is it the code? Is it the output? Is it one output, or is it the 1,000 outputs? Is it the way you react to the fact that there are 1,000 outputs that are interesting or not? So it is a lot of things, and that's why I was mentioning earlier that to me it's like a moving target between a lot of things, where also the artist's process comes into play. And that's why, for me, for example, it's interesting to put out some writing, some article, trying to express the ideas that came with the artwork along. And in this sense, it reminds me a lot of this John Cage piece, 340 something, 350 something. I never remember the exact numbers, but it's like silence for 3 minutes and 40 whatever seconds, and it's. I think I have never seen it performed live, but I want to, because to me it is so mesmerizing just to see some people coming out on stage with, they will tune their instruments, and they will do like they're going to play, and then they stay silent for 3 and something minutes, and then they stand up and they get an ovation. I mean, their ovation, or maybe someone throws something because they didn't. But it's that relationship, right? So what is the art or the artwork there? I've got no idea. That's my answer.
And so how did you guys, so as you've experimented with creating these visual works of art, how did you find yourself experimenting with NFTs and, starting to put your work out there? How did that start? Anyone? Go for it.
Actually, it's wonderful because before NFTs, we needed to plot something or to, try to find some kind of projection, or to program a Raspberry to connect it to something, and it's like it was always a kind of we call it in Portuguese a gambiarra, kind of mishmash, I think. And now with NFTs, when you are with the code inside the contract, it's perfect. It's a perfect way to, I can even say it's so perfect. It's finally, it has your own place to exist.
I think there are place for different things. NFTs are one thing, are one channel, but as you mentioned before, before we had to plot, and I think, now you can still plot.
Yes, of course, I love plot.
Or don't say you cannot. No, you can plot, you can exhibit things, so there are just different ways to do. The thing is that for many years we've been restricted to creating things which we were completely aware that they had no value because it was a digital asset. So, or I did a visualization when I was working in that. So for me, it was kind of an art because it take me like 1 year on finishing one visualization, a good one. I don't work like so fast, let's say. But I mean, now you can add value to these things. So when my work is digital, I just go through NFTs because it's like the way to put it on the market and get value to the code itself. When we talk to generative, not again digital versus generative, there is, for me, a difference there. So yeah, there are now things that I can understand the discussion many times of, I'm not saying I don't agree with that, but it's something that we can discuss. If we can put everything on the NFT sphere, like for instance, I do plotter work, and then I can also sell it through NFTs, which is fine. But I'm not sure if this is the way, because we invented this because we had the need. So if we mess everything, that will be the perfect recipe for discussions. But I mean, if we really understand why the NFTs are here, and they're just because we need to get value to the things, and when we don't need them, we don't use them. So
I think the question is, are we using NFT as a contract or as a medium? Because it can be both, but the choice that you make when you are, meeting your artwork makes all the difference. It's a medium or it's just the contract.
Personally, I think that NFT, a good thing with the NFT that they opened up the generative art bottle. It's like, oh, there's this bottle, we forgot it at the back. And I think that's the best thing that happened to a generative art ever. But that's not the end of it. We don't need to, to fix our thoughts on it. Currently, I think the vibe is more like, can we convert physical and traditional artwork into making something NFT or look alike traditional art? But I think that there's much more to it. Like, I think the animation NFT is really underrated. What about an NFT that can change depending on the season? There's so much more to explore, and I think we're just at the beginning, but because we have the background from the traditional world. But I think experimentation is on the way, but it's just really the beginning. It's really, and we don't need to. The good thing is now we see generative art as art, and now we can go back to the old and traditional world and say, "Hey, this is art," and we can value it, and we can see it, and we can, we can say that's proper art. So that's a good ping pong feedback, I would say, but that's not the end of it. I think there's much more.
Yeah, not much more to add, but just to stress one thing, it is undeniable that the fact that NFTs are there makes these, there's money in it, let's say. But this has been actually good because of what William was saying. All of a sudden, if there is money in this, then people will actually look at it, because otherwise you wouldn't look at something that, right click, save, etc. And actually, there all this debate about, is it this is just pure speculation, and well, artists also have to eat, and they also have to get paid. And if you were a digital artist that were producing in a originally digital, because you were doing it with code, you didn't really have many other options. And okay, so the field has been now blooming in the past year, because actually there were many practitioners and many people who were interested, but they couldn't really dedicate the time to it. So I think I totally subscribe what they said, and I think there is a lot of exploration yet to come. And we always need to understand that NFTs use for two purposes, which is also, I guess, what Monica was saying. They can be acted just as a contract, just this financial side, which we need. And then there is this NFT as an exploration medium, which has so much potential.
Oh, absolutely. I think just for time, I guess we'll just kind of wrap it up, but I do just want to stress digital art as a whole tends to be wrapped up or used. The words are typically digital art, computer art, generative art, all these things, and there is a stress, especially for me as a curator, to really define or start defining the taxonomy to describe this artwork and looking into algorithmic art, but what is algorithmic art on the blockchain, and really starting to strengthen up the criticism and just the thought leadership behind it. So we're pretty much, I think, at time. I'm hoping we can get some questions from the audience. I think that would be really helpful. So if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand, let us know. Cool.
Hi. So my question is, because in this type of art, there's always an element of randomness associated with it, more in others than others. So my question is, when you find that unpredictability, how much do you lend yourselves to it, and how much does it influence your work? So it's kind of like, how much do you force your own vision into the work that comes out as an output? So how much do you lend yourselves to it? Thank you. That's for all four of you. Thanks.
I can start. I would say there's two ways of working in generative art. There's this long form that we saw last year blooming, but there's still the old way to do it. And I think in the old way to do it, the randomness has a huge part. You just let the computer output something and you just work with it. And with the long form, it's a bit different. You start from something really random, and you try to compose with what your computer is giving to you, and try to limit it, to constrain it into like a box, to say, okay, don't go outside of this box, because I know this is the sweet spot of my algorithm, and this is where you should go. But I think this is really constraining a lot the algorithm, and there is so much more outside of the box. And I think it is really important to let like a full randomness guide you as well. So it's really collaboration. Just throw something like a random 0, 1, 2, 3, and just see what happens, and then you can work from it.
Yeah, in my case, I'm not a coder, so I don't have this discipline, which I enjoy a lot. Because in my case, I let's say I can read code, I can write code, but it's not like I studied that. So from my process, what I try to do always is start from something that I write, or I had some algorithm from nature, as you mentioned before, from physics or whatever, and then I destroy it completely. And there is something very beautiful in that, because if you destroy it and you put like very crazy parameters and really destroy it, then sometimes you see appearing some natural figures, and that's amazing because you didn't design that. But sometimes I obtain like birds or flowers or the sea or skylines. And then when I see something, I say, okay, here it's something very interesting. And then you begin polishing the process until getting to where you think you can go. But that process, it's incredible, because if you really find a leaf in your program and you weren't trying to do that, that unlocks these kind of questions that I was telling in the beginning. Maybe we can start understanding why the leaves are like that, because if I go back in my code and I say, wow, this is so crazy what I did here, and then you say, okay, so the leaves are done by that, with these rules. So yeah, there is a as you mentioned before, forth and back all the time about randomness and polish that randomness.
Yeah, I think there is a good, how to say, a good paradigm in generative art is the concept of emergence. And most of the time, you have an idea and you end up completely somewhere else. Because you find on the way something. You rarely go from point A to point B. It's really, you end up something, Z. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
I just like to play with code, and it's
Yeah, so playing with code is very important indeed. And just to add a little bit to what they say, sometimes you have like a very clear idea. I want to make this system like so this one that we showed here. To me, it was like very clear. I wanted to get there. So of course there is you open the door to say let's all these parameters. Throw all the random numbers you can at them to see where you get at, to see this emergence, to see what happens when you break it, like Iskra was saying. But let's say it already had a very strong focus to something, like I'm painting rings there, so you kind of go very far away from there. But then there's also another source of randomness, which is all the bugs that you make in your code that open up new doors. And my works are full of bugs undercover that is like, oh, look at this beautiful shape there. That's a bug, but I liked it. And it's not so strange. I believe this happens in absolutely everything we do. I mean, like we have discovered medicines thanks to that and other things. So it's just another way of incorporating randomness into what you do. Just wanted to add that.
Just to add something related to that, now there is a very interesting debate in the community when we release long-form projects that you have like 1,000, and then, I don't know, in the middle of the minting, you discover that there is a bug which makes your program like not working properly, and that's like so stressing. But then there is a question there: can an artwork be wrong? My artwork doesn't work now. What does it mean? So this is very interesting because we are in the middle of a design system or an engineering engine and an artwork which I think it cannot not work, So yeah, it's an interesting point now.
Yeah, I think this is where we have to be careful with the market and how it drives us into making something, and we have to be, you have to be, how to say, like, you have to own our work and say, yeah, this is what it is. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but this is what I have to offer.
I have a mean question. That might be a modernist question related to medium specificity. And I'm asking you because you're in front of me, but I could ask to people or to anybody. What I've seen, like that you have shown, in many ways, doesn't differ so much from works of art that could be produced by other means. You have a work and you acknowledge that looks like, or like is inspired by Sonia Delaunay, flower pattern that could remind me of the movement, pattern and decoration, and so on and so forth. You are working with a medium, with technology, which is extremely innovative. And you were mentioning artists like Namjoon Paik, John Cage. When I look at the work of Namjoon Paik, when I listen to the 3 minutes and so on of silence, something about, with Paik, sculpture, moving image, communication, music changed. Our understanding of what a work of art can be. If I listen to John Cage, the result of what he does, whether it's with music or when he worked with, I'm trying to remember the name of his musical partners, but something about our understanding of music changes. When I see what I've seen coming out of NFTs, I'm sorry to say that, but it's really a genuine question. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I am. What is the medium specificity? How what you produce might or might not, it might not be the point, affect, change the way we think of art and the way art can, the way we think of art. As an art historian, you know, I always, that's what I look at. I'm searching for that. Something, I want to see something that I want to see because I have never seen it before. So how the medium that you use is pushing us to look at something that we have never seen it before, or maybe to look at something in ways we have never looked at something before. Thank you.
I can try.
Oh, yes.
I'm not sure whether I will. I like to think about generative art as a natural continuation of the conceptual art and the concrete movement. In an essence, you are working with geometric forms because you need to describe them in a numerical way so the program can work. That's more or less the concrete movement that can. And from the conceptual, I like to think about Saul Lewitt and the wall drawings. So he has an instruction, but it's an analogical one. It's a generative process. You can call it this. And what's different when you are talking about a digital generative process? Well, you have the computer. You have the ability to produce a lot of outputs from one information. And I think that changes everything because when you think in a work, you are not thinking about one image. You are thinking in a system that you have no total control. You don't know how the images will look like, and you will generate like 3,000 images. And you need to trust your system because it's similar in visual ways to the conceptual or to the concrete, but what you are doing there, it's completely different. I don't know if I made myself clear in a way.
So if the notion that from one decision you can produce these 3 million images, how do you share that? Because that's for me in what you say, it's very important. This endless generation. So how, when you show your work, when you share your work, this notion of this inflation of content, whether it's sound or images, how do you share that? And how this inflation of content can actually, or can it be transparent enough that we understand the way it has been conceived?
Oh, can I keep going? It's like...
Thank you for indulging.
Well, it's my pleasure, actually. With some friends, we always talk about it, and I think there is a few ways to see these questions. One of those is when you don't trust your system a lot, so you produce like 1,000 images and you make, we call it in Portuguese, curadoria da aleatoriedade, like you create your own aleatoriedade.
I understood that, of course.
Yes. And then you choose like 4 or 3 images and that's what you are going to show. And that's a way to understand. So you pick 3, 4 good images and you narrow that to those results. Or you can pass through a process like art blocks. When you have no idea what's going to happen, you need to trust, you have a system, and then you have 10,000 and not 3. And so I think when you look at a group of images, you can make a few questions. Are they similar enough to be part of the same group? And are they different enough to continue giving me interest to see another one and another one and another one? I think those questions are good guides to us to try to understand it. It's like another comparison that we can do. It's Albers and the squares. I don't know in English the name, but the square everybody knows. So he did so many of them, and it's easy to do this in a computer. You could do it, it would be very simple. And but the repetition and the understand that he was trying to do as you see the whole group of paintings. I think you can try the same perspective in generative art as when you are going to see Albers, for instance.
Yeah, I was going to add, I think it's more about, it brings us back to the question from Sofia, like what's the art? And I was saying it's more about the context that you have to grasp. And also, you have to understand that it is not only about the outputs, it's also the systems. And this is a combination that makes the art. And as Monica was saying, when you see one output, it's part of a system. And I think you have to zoom out and see the whole thing to appreciate the system.
For me, I really thank you for a question, because I think it's the most interesting question anybody asks me or in something like that, because I agree. I think we are in the very beginning of something that takes all the work from the pioneers, but now we have just bigger computers and more powerful to do things, but we take from there all the knowledge and all the, they were braver than us bringing this to a table in like 50 years ago. So now we are taking this with great computers, with machine learning knowledge, with some AI knowledge, but the people who really know how to do that, they come from the engineering fields, or so most of us, we deal with these questions and complexity, and I'm sure we have not exploded yet, because it's, we have to be aware of the market. We have to understand the financial question. We have to understand the technology. We have to understand blockchain and everything. And I miss provocation in the work. And that's something that we talk a lot about. And I'm sure with the provocation will come something that you can say, aha, at some point with someone who, I don't know, in the near future. Once everything is like established, one can break it. Now it's like we have to deal with many, many things, and I miss this provocation. But maybe it could start with reflecting, as Sophia does very well, about how to exhibit the work. And you mentioned you have to see the whole system. So a good provocation in terms of thinking about that question is in terms of a museum, for example. The museum has the works it has, and it's complicated to change that works like every day, right? Because you don't have a lot of work. So if you can find a generative artist who built like a very consistent system and a good one, maybe he or she can fill the whole building if you have the means, like a great printer and everything, like in one hour. So that is something that
would be great.
Yeah. And then you can change it.
Do I still need people? Do I still need people, or just have a machine?
Yeah. But I mean, that's some change in the thing that one artist can fill a whole building in 1 hour with something that actually is beautiful and works and it's consistent. And so that's the work, or just one iteration. So I believe that the way we exhibit the work changed like during the last centuries. So once we decided to exhibit the work with space around, it has a meaning because we had to see that work like what it is, and then the other one far from it because it's another thing. But now if everything is son of the same system or daughter, we don't need this space, or maybe we do, I don't know. But this reflection about, in my head, looks like these crazy houses of psychopaths with a lot of pictures connecting
things. That's the definition of a museum. That's the definition of a museum, the big houses of psychopaths.
Yeah. So I think, it's a great place to do that.
Yeah, so, I subscribe everything that has been said, and I think also it goes very much to the question of what is the work of art here. And to this point, the NFTs have been both a blessing and a curse. Blessing because it has allowed people to, enter the space and devote themselves to do art. But a curse because of Beeple, not poor him, but the thing is, it now everything stinks like, oh, you're just trying to make money, and we haven't had the time really to still develop what all the things that we've been doing, like they have very well described. There are very interesting projects that are maybe like the Silence of John Cage, or like the white canvas of Malevich, the white square of Malevich, it's just a white square. Well, what are you doing? Well, it has some significance, I see you there. I see you. For some, but there are like artworks that you have seen like here just still images of these things. Some of the artworks, for example, allow you as digital art. They allow you to encode things other than the end picture, because what is the end picture? In some artworks, for example, you can expose the whole painting process, which you cannot do with traditional art. And maybe it's interesting because maybe it's a middle point, the artwork, or maybe the artwork is the whole process, or maybe the artwork is something else. And you actually get to see those things in certain projects, and then there are other projects where you actually breed artworks, combining this artwork, and they will mix together, and there will be another artwork born in the blockchain, and then the two parents are going to disappear, which is also an interesting artwork in itself, and it's generative, and it's the problem again is it's very hard to show those artworks with one image. They require a whole new way of thinking about first what is the artwork, and then how you show it, like we've been discussing. And I do believe that your question is one that would get us started like for hours talking, and I believe that we all would love to continue this conversation. So if at any point you would like to keep it, let's do it.
Yeah, I actually have a comment too, because I think thinking about how do you display this artwork, what is the artwork, and we look again at Soloid, a perfect example where he gives the museum a set of instructions to execute the artwork. But Frieder Nacke put it best, saying this is a post-industrial art. So now we don't need a craftsman to create the artwork. The machine does it for us. So the artists here are giving their ideas. They're making it very explicit for the computer to produce that. And I think when we think about how to showcase it and bring it into our physical space, there are a lot of different ways to do that, and I think that's also the most interesting part, where now it's not a one-size-fits-all answer of how you decide to showcase your generative art, because it might look really beautiful as a print, even though it lives, it lives on the computer, or maybe it's going to be done with a projector, or or a digital screen. I think now there's all this rise of people trying to fight for digital screens to have in their home. But we're at this exciting point now where we're trying to figure out how is the best way to showcase generative artwork outside the computer, because I think right now in the computer we do, the grid is everywhere. We just see all this artwork living in this grid, and we scroll down and it's how collectors look, trying to see which one has this feature that I'm looking for. But trying to translate that into a physical space, I think, is really interesting.
So if I can add just something very short. Actually, the grid is also a curse, and it's because of the market. And it's because we want to buy one iteration of the algorithm without understanding that the artwork maybe is the whole thing, it's the algorithm, which is, by the way, good, because then we can eat and do more art. Well, I don't know if that's good, that we can make more art. In some cases, maybe that's not so good. But the thing is, that it's very hard to understand when you see the grid what is the algorithm. So sometimes it's not very typical, but you also get to see that the work sold is the generator itself, which is more interesting, because that is the algorithm expressing itself in real time, and you get the point that whenever that image goes away and the next one comes along, the previous one is gone forever. Because we are kind of too used to hold on to permanent objects, maybe because we are afraid to die. And we say, oh, if I have this painting which is always the same, then I'm also going to be always the same. That painting is going to be there when you die, by the way. But anyway, so maybe if you have an artwork that also dies constantly, which is what generative art inherently is, because we decide to keep outputs. But
that's actually a great idea, that if you own art, the art you own dies when you die.
Sorry?
That's a fantastic idea, that as a collector, you have a collection, and the moment you die, the collection self-destroys.
You can do that.
Or you give it to a museum.
With an NFT, you can do that. With digital art, you can do that. Yeah.
It's very easy.
Would you ever sell a collector your algorithm, or that's something I've always thought about?
Yes.
Okay. Would you sell the algorithm as art, and
just the algorithm?
Just the algorithm. You give them the code. Dun dun.
Depends.
I don't know.
How is it going to be copyleft, or it depends on
just
the terms.
Just something to think about.
Make code, not war.
Yeah.
Can I just put one more aspect of the generative art that I think that is not so related to the aesthetics, but that I think it's also shapes what this medium is. As we have a kind of encoding of information. So image relates to a very precise input. So I can use as input everything I would like to. For instance, I could use the age of you, the name, or your ID number, and this will be encoded in a visual way. You are not perceiving that, but all of those works are related to one very specific input. And also, it's something that we are not seeing right now here, but it's this idea that algorithms can be evolutionary, and you can have images that die, that cross with each other in collections that die.
There's one artist, Def Beef, who does that anytime. He's created this entire series of algorithmic artwork that anytime it's transferred to a new collector, it slowly disintegrates, which is fascinating. Do we have any more questions? How are we with time?
I think we still have a couple of minutes.
Okay. Do we have one more question we can get into?
Well, I had lots of questions, but Philip stole my questions about the displaying. But it had to do, on your presentation, Sophia, when we saw some of the pictures from installations you made, what is the difference? So you have images framed, hanged on the wall. So
What is the medium specificity?
That was a much older. That was my first showcase. I should have shown pictures of the last one that we did in Miami during.
But this is. I think this is the question. How can the work you do relate to the medium specificity, and also the questions of how do you set it up? So you said we were having this strong discussion, strong disagreement last night because of the. So you show the code with the images. Otherwise, you're just seeing some prints on the wall. What you do. But besides that question, I have another one. During this very stimulating afternoon, that I think, at least for me, it gave me a lot to think of. You were only talking about code. And one of the key characteristics of contemporary art is the worriness or the worries with the social, gender, climate, etc. So how come all these worries that are so present in contemporary art are so absent from your work?
They are not absent in my person. They don't need to be explicit in my work.
Well, yeah, maybe. For me, there are many projects that talk about these topics, but my question is, you said this is something very present in the contemporary art. Maybe this is not anymore contemporary art. Maybe that's the point here. Maybe we are not anymore about the concept. I think always the art has been there for that, right? But I think there is a change here with that. We were talking last night about the code or the technical complexity of the work, if it has to be shown or not, I don't know. But what I really believe is that centuries ago, complexity and technique was on the basis of the art. Not like a few weeks ago, I was talking with a friend in Madrid about a drawing by Velázquez, which I personally don't like, because the aesthetics I don't like, but I had to understand that he just changed everything with that light and that perspective and everything, and how he aligned the family. And so it was very important for the people at that time, the technique, and he was the master of that. But the aesthetic, or he was not provoking, he was drawing what he had to draw and represent like society at that time. So then we moved along a lot of time, and then we passed through many different movements, and the last one was the concept and the provocation and the black square, and then all the rest of the things, right? And then we are here. And I really see that now there is no concept. Now there is this kind of, who can do this for the first time? Who can do the perfect code? Who can? So I'm not saying it's better or worse, but maybe we are not anymore in the contemporary art. Maybe it's a new thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's bad things to compare generative art to other. I think like to contemporary art or anything else. I think generative art has its own questions, like what's the interaction between human and machine, what can we do with AI and stuff like that. And I think those questions, we have to define those questions first before breaking them. I think that's the whole point, because this is really the beginning. Like, even if it's like it's during, we've been making, like, people have been making this for like 16 years or even more, and I think it's really not that much in the movement. So I think it's just an ongoing thing.
It is an ongoing thing, and I don't know if you were going to say something.
I do have some thoughts. I just wanted to say that there are two artists I would definitely recommend you check out. We were talking about one of them yesterday, Maya Mann. She is always reflecting on her femininity and living in a social media world and identity online, and she's constantly reflecting on transgender right, being an Asian woman in America. Emily, she also her project did something that I thought was really wonderful, in which her artwork using an algorithm also found a way to show her culture as an Asian woman, and it reflecting on Japanese woodwork, and that's something that we don't see often in generative art, as I think you were trying to reference. So I think moving forward, we are starting to see artists take it. It's not so much take it a step further, but just go on in the conceptual side and using their code to explain that message in their own style. But I think for the most part, the idea is the visual, that visual idea is the art. And so what these artists are trying to do is create a system and be very explicit with the computer. I think one of the key things, you will respect this so much the second you try to create a circle with code. Like just go into a browser and try to create it. And I think when you see the visual outputs that a lot of these artists are creating, you can understand and connect with it on a whole other level, where it's not so much of the idea or what their response is to society, but oh my goodness, your mind could create something that visually stunning.
And yet, if you, this goes back to me, it goes back a little bit to the question of how you actually display the artworks so that people understand them. Because if you take an artwork, a conceptual artwork that talks about identity, for example, in the traditional contemporary art world, if that term even exists, and they only show you, for example, the painting, right? No explanation given, no context about the artist, you've got no idea what they're talking about in that work, and you believe that it's just some paint poured over a canvas in some cases. I'm not saying that absolutely every artwork is like that. So to me, it is very important to find a way to either exhibit the work with some explanation, which happens all the time in contemporary art. There's always this, explanation about an artist, their life, their story, their whatever, their intent with the work. So a lot of generative art has some intent in it, or has some reflections on it that maybe don't show if you only see an image, of course. But again, it's about finding a way of communicating all that, with the extra difficulty that it's not just one image that you have to communicate, but rather a whole system. And actually, I do believe that a whole system may have much higher expressive capacity to talk about issues in society, whichever issues they are, and whichever issues the artist would like to address. Because the artist is still entitled to talk about what they want. Generative being a tool, but not just a tool. I mean, it is a tool, but again, as we were mentioning, maybe it is a new movement. Mm-hmm. Maybe the mix of generative with narrative, with concept, with whatever happens, yields the emergence of something that it's slightly different, or very different, or.
Yeah, I definitely think it will come, like later. But the roots of generative art are working with the machine and producing something with randomness, building a system. So the roots are not about communicating society problems. It's about interaction with the machine and how we can translate that, and how we can interpret it, and how we can show it to people. Even if in Sophia's presentation, everything we saw, we don't see only one output, the variable work. It's always a system that you see, and that's how you understand what she was trying to do and to communicate. So I think there's definitely a question with the displaying of the system that will communicate something, but it's not necessarily about society. I think it will just come later.
No, but I also think there are something with society in this thing, because you mentioned about environment and gender problems, and that's something that we try to target as a society for the last years. But now, actually, we have other also problems in society, which are very, very related with our relationship with machines, our privacy, the role of humans in the labor market, and many, many things right there. And that art, it's all about how can we communicate with the machine. And many times we can find that borders in the dialogue. I can just come to this point and but as I mentioned before, there is a way to break these walls, because you are just doing art. You cannot, you don't have to explain why, you just do that. So we are facing many times these kind of problems. The thing is that maybe we are not aware of that, or we are not able, or we didn't find a way to express this dialogue to the people. And that could be a great message, I agree. But I'm sure there are social, very delicate issues in here. We can find a way to communicate, because, yeah, that's the society we live now.
As you see, we liked your question.
Well, I think we're at time then. So thank you guys so much for being here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.